The president, known for jumping to wild conclusions today, still unwilling to criticize in any way the Saudis for what seems a killing of a U.S.-based journalist, as new evidence closes in on the Crown Prince's inner circle. Today, shocking new details about the hell Jamal Khashoggi endured inside that Saudi consulate and what Turkish officials say an audio recording reveals about his final moments on this earth. And so you're saying his dad didn't kill JFK now? President Trump going all in for Senator Ted Cruz as Cruz's Democratic challenger rips a page from the Trump book of nasty nicknames. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We begin with the politics lead. President Trump taking a stunningly dismissive tone about any possible Saudi leadership role in the disappearance and apparent murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. This afternoon, the president is denying he's giving cover in any way to the Saudis, insisting he simply wants to find out what happened. But that's about as tough as the president was willing to get. He has had harsher words in the last week or so for Stormy Daniels, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Taylor Swift than he has had for the Saudis, responsible for the likely butchering and slaughter of a Washington Post columnist. Instead, President Trump has expressed support for Saudi denials of knowledge of the apparent murder, despite the strong circumstantial case that Saudi leaders had to have known, and their initial denials they knew anything about anything. And the president has emphasized the hundreds of billions of dollars in arms and military equipment that the Saudis have pledged to purchase from American defense contractors. Today, President Trump refusing to say whether the FBI is involved in any investigation, and he pointed out for at least the fifth time by our count that Khashoggi was not an American citizen, though it is worth noting the journalist lived in the United States and contributed to an American newspaper. We have this story covered from the White House to Istanbul, Turkey, and we'll get the latest details on the investigation from there in a moment. But first, let's begin with CNN's Pamela Brown at the White House. And Pamela, over and over today, President Trump highlighting the billions of dollars the Saudis will spend on U.S. military equipment.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. President Trump appears to be softening his tone towards Saudi Arabia, repeatedly emphasizing today how much the U.S. needs Saudi Arabia when it comes to the arms deal, the fight against terrorism, Iran. He also appeared to give the benefit of the doubt to the Saudis in their denials, while also casting doubt on whether this audio tape exists that suggests this Washington Post journalist was tortured and then killed shortly after entering the Saudi consulate. President Trump today not giving details about the investigation surrounding the disappearance of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, playing coy with reporters in the Oval Office when pressed if he's asked for the FBI's involvement.
Why not send the FBI in to figure all this out?
Well, he wasn't a citizen of this country, for one thing, and we're going to determine that. And you don't know whether or not we have, do you?
Well,
No, but do you know whether or not we've sent the FBI?
You sent the FBI.
I'm not going to tell you.
Well, go ahead. Mr. President.
Why would I tell you?
Trump indicating the U.S. asked the Turkish authorities to hand over audio recordings they claim proves Khashoggi was tortured, murdered, and dismembered while inside the Saudi consulate in Turkey.
We have asked for it if it exists. We have asked for it. Yeah. We've asked for it if it exists.
The president once again casting doubt on the mounting evidence that Saudi Arabia was behind Khashoggi's disappearance and failing to point the finger at the kingdom, telling the Associated Press, "Here we go again with 'you're guilty until proven innocent.' I don't like that." Comparing the investigation to the allegations now Justice Brett Kavanaugh faced earlier this month.
We'll get down to the bottom of it.
The president also telling Fox Business the U.S. needs Saudi Arabia both for the fight against terror and as a financial partner.
I hope we're going to be on the better side of the equation. You know, we need Saudi Arabia in terms of our fight against all of the terrorism.
But we're not going to walk away from Saudi Arabia.
I do not want to do that.
Trump later insisting he's not providing cover for the Mideast ally, but rather he is waiting on a report from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is returning from the Middle East after meetings with the Saudis and the Turks.
I'm not giving cover at all. But I want to find out what happened, where is the fault, and we will probably know that by the end of the week.
So President Trump is expected to be briefed by Secretary Pompeo upon his return either tonight or tomorrow. It remains to be seen what exactly Pompeo will be briefing the president on, considering Pompeo admitted to reporters today, Jake, that the Saudis did not want to share any facts with him. He also said that the Saudis have pledged to conduct a transparent investigation, so it remains to be seen how much credence the administration will give to this investigation, considering the mounting evidence that the Saudis are responsible for the disappearance and apparent killing of this Washington Post journalist. Jake?
All right, Pamela Brown, thank you so much. Grisly new details have been revealed about the torture and likely murder of Khashoggi, a source telling CNN that the journalist may have been injected with some kind of tranquilizer before he died in the consulate and his body was dismembered. CNN senior international correspondent Arwa Damon joins me now from outside the Saudi Consul General's residence in Istanbul, Turkey. Arwa, forensic investigators were on the scene there today. Have the Turkish officials been able to gather any crime scene evidence?
Well, here's the thing. Let's take a look at what they found in the consulate, some sort of a toxic substance they're looking into. They say that all of the walls had been repainted. They also took DNA samples here at the Consul General's residence. Well, they've been inside already for 6 hours. A caravan of Turkish forensics teams descended on the Saudi consul's residence today, gloves and hazmat suits on, ready to conduct their first search of the property since Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance more than 2 weeks ago. Teams of Saudi investigators also piling in. This as U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he received assurances from Turkish President Erdogan that a thorough investigation is underway. Turkey's Foreign Affairs Minister says Pompeo used his visit to deliver messages from President Trump as well as information from the Saudis. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was all smiles as he met with Secretary Pompeo yesterday, telling him he is also keen to examine the Khashoggi case, but denied any involvement. The authenticity of that claim coming into question, as sources tell CNN, the mastermind behind Khashoggi's death was a senior intelligence official, with one source saying he was close to bin Salman's inner circle. Still, Pompeo left ample room for the oil-rich ally to find alternative explanations.
Mr. Khashoggi is missing. I'm not going to get ahead of. We have two countries conducting investigations. We're going to give them the space to complete their investigations of this incident.
And the basic facts surrounding Khashoggi's fate were not discussed.
I don't want to talk about any of the facts. They didn't want to either.
According to Turkish media, an audio recording from inside the consulate indicates Khashoggi was tortured and then killed soon after entering. A source tells CNN agents may have injected the journalist with a tranquilizer to subdue him. The gruesome details are emerging as we learn more about who those agents were. According to a source, Turkish authorities are now investigating Maher Abdelaziz Mutrib, a member of the elite protection brigade tasked with guarding the Saudi crown prince. Turkey has identified 15 Saudis who arrived and left the same day Khashoggi went missing as persons of interest in the journalist's death. At least 9 worked in Saudi security forces, military or government ministries, according to the New York Times. Still, the United States is allowing Saudi to reach its own conclusions.
We have many overlapping interest places we work together.
Secretary Pompeo now returning to Washington with hopes that Saudi will keep its promise.
They made a commitment to hold anyone connected to any wrongdoing that may be found accountable for that.
And Jake, this has become such a highly politicized case, and it's not just about U.S.-Saudi dynamics. There's, of course, the various different dynamics with Turkey and various different regional players, and it's going to be quite interesting to see exactly what sort of differences or similarities there end up being between the report that Turkey comes up with and the one that Saudi Arabia decides to release, especially given the various different competing interests and, of course, various different nations' economic ties to the kingdom.
All right, Ara Damon in Turkey for us. Thanks so much. Let's talk about this, but let's start with CNN's Caitlin Collins who has some breaking news on this. And Caitlin, you're learning more about the role of Jared Kushner. That's obviously the president's son-in-law, a senior advisor who has established from very early on in the Crown Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Salman's reign, a very close working relationship.
Yeah, and the more that this becomes a full-blown diplomatic crisis, the more scrutiny there is on Jared Kushner because he did tout that close relationship with MBS, the Crown Prince, for so long. And now what we're seeing is he's not saying anything publicly, and he's intentionally doing that because several White House officials fear that if he was really involved on this on a public front, because he has such a close relationship with the Crown Prince that there would be backlash. That's a big part of why we didn't see him travel with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, when he was sent to Riyadh to meet with the Saudi officials this week. And it's a big part of why we haven't seen him say anything publicly. He went to New York last night, and as you've seen, there's that video of him getting off the plane in New York with his wife, Ivanka Trump, also a White House employee. And a reporter tried to ask about the questions about the Saudis and their role and their potential role in this. And he didn't answer the question, and his Secret Service agent traveling with him kind of blocked the phone. A lot it has to do is they are trying not to have any more scrutiny on Jared Kushner in any kind of role. But we are told that behind the scenes, he's helping shape the response to this. He's the one who told to the Saudis and told them they needed to call for an investigation into the disappearance of this reporter. And this also comes as President Trump is getting really frustrated with the news coverage of this and this idea that he has this cozy relationship with the Saudi officials. So all of that is happening, but what we are seeing is essentially Jared Kushner intentionally take a step back from all of this so as there is not so much scrutiny on him. But the question is, what is the cost going to be? Because he's touted this close relationship. He was the one who convinced President Trump to make his first foreign trip as president, to go to Riyadh first. He hosted MBS. He came to the United States for a tour earlier this spring. He messages with him on WhatsApp. He's done that in the past, which was a national security concern. So he does have a close relationship with him, and it's really coming under the spotlight now with all of this going on and the disappearance of this reporter.
And Amanda, let me read you what the Washington Post, David Ignatius, reported this morning. Quote, Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and advisor, urged MBS last weekend to organize an investigation that could identify the culprit responsible for Khashoggi's death. Two sources told me the next day after speaking with the Saudi king. The president said he thought rogue killers within Saudi Arabia's government may have been responsible, seemingly telegraphing a fall guy strategy. The accusation that some Democrats are making when they see things like this in the press is that Jared Kushner and President Trump are helping the Saudis escape blame for what they did.
Here's how I see it. There's some Republicans on Capitol Hill, like Lindsey Graham, who are so hopped up and angry at this situation, they're calling for regime change in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, you said MBS.
Shouldn't we hear from Jared Kushner, who's the architect of the Saudi Arabian policy, before we go to that measure? Why is Jared Kushner, who is always eager to plant himself good press and take credit for things whenever he has the opportunity, why is he being allowed to evade responsibility here? And the security element that Caitlin brought up is highly concerning.
The Secret Service?
No, not the Secret Service, although that is, the messaging that's been reported in numerous outlets that Jared Kushner, not only with Saudi Arabia, has communicated with foreign officials outside secure channels, despite warnings from people, who would prefer him not to. Why is he this rogue foreign policy actor inside the White House who has no accountability? That boggles my mind.
Small thing we should know is that after it was reported that he was messaging people like the Crown Prince on WhatsApp, he started to pick up on that concern and he started filling in White House officials on his calls.
But one more thing. He had numerous security clearance problems, and I'm still not even sure if those have all been resolved. And
there was all this reporting, Bill, from earlier by The Intercept that Kushner met with MBS, may have even given him information about people within the kingdom he couldn't trust. That MBS told people that he had Jared Kushner in his pocket. We should point out Jared Kushner, through his lawyer, has denied all of this to The Intercept. But there are some serious questions here about this relationship.
Yeah, it's a problem when you try to run it as a relationship between the House of Trump and the House of Saud, as opposed to through government channels. There's a reason you have ambassadors, assistant secretaries of state.
And we should know there is no ambassador to Saudi Arabia.
Right, but the chargé would take notes normally in a meeting if a senior American went over, for example, to meet with someone like MBS. I'm not sure that happened. There are these phone calls that seem to be totally offline without records. So just as a matter of kind of good governance, it's a problem. And, of course, there are further questions then about the family relationships in terms of money. I think this could be, this is a real crisis, I think, a real foreign policy crisis, not just a Trump White House crisis. I mean, it's funny how foreign policy works, and you've seen this over the years too, Jake. I mean, this horrible war in Yemen, famine with 1 million people, Putin's killed people, there was the Helsinki thing. You never know but this one feels like it might become a moment where the whole Trump foreign policy gets put in question. People have been saying, well, he really hasn't been tested by a crisis. He's been sort of lucky. He's made things that people like me think are big foreign policy mistakes, but we haven't paid much of a price for them. You could have a real question now about our relationship with the Saudi regime, which is has been an important historical relationship, one that has been controversial at times, one that should have been more controversial perhaps, and it could be a real moment here of interesting moment for American foreign policy.
And Simone, as Bill points out, the U.S. has been turning a blind eye to Saudi human rights abuses
for a while,
for decades. But there's probably no president that has more starkly talked about why we need Saudi Arabia in their view than President Trump talks about it. Take a listen to him talking to Fox Business, which trying to explain, I think, in some ways, why he doesn't seem to care more about the murder of this journalist.
You know, we need Saudi Arabia in terms of our fight against all of the terrorism, everything that's happening in Iran and other places.
But we're not going to walk away from Saudi Arabia.
No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I do not want to do that. And frankly, they have a tremendous order, $110 billion. Every country in the world wanted a piece of that order. We got all of it. And what are we going to do?
$110 billion, first of all, that's not an official figure in terms of lines that have been signed. But beyond that, that's money for American defense contractors.
Absolutely. You know, look, I think it's very interesting that for a long time, many people across the board on both sides of the aisles have turned a blind eye. And I mean, most recently in what's happening in Yemen. And it's very striking to me that with the capture and seemingly assassination, if you will, murder of this journalist, that is the thing that is bringing everyone together to say, hey, okay, we have to hold the Saudis accountable.
As opposed to the school bus
full of Yemeni children. School bus full of Yemeni children, or as opposed to when the Crown Prince MBS locked up a number of senior officials in hotels, seemingly basically locked them up at the Ritz for a while in Saudi Arabia. So I do find that interesting. Donald Trump has been very clear, though. What he said on Fox Business is not much different than what he said during his rally in Kentucky last weekend. Is that, look, I get a lot of money from the Saudis. He said he personally gets a lot of money as personal business interests. Now he's talking about the business interests of United States defense contractors. This is something that should cause everyone to give pause. And I hope to hear more folks on the Republican side of the aisle call for something to be held accountable.
Everyone stick around. We'll keep talking about this. The Secretary of State said the Saudis didn't want to talk about any of the facts regarding the apparent murder of the Saudi journalist. So what's the purpose of a fact-finding mission again? And from vote like I'm on the ballot to not my fault if we lose, President Trump giving himself a new out in case a blue wave comes his way. Stay with us.
All over. But he spent a lot of time.
And we're back with the world lead and continuing the conversation about the apparent murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi and the response or lack thereof from the Trump administration. Amanda, let me start with something that President Trump told the Associated Press regarding the claims that Saudi leadership must have been behind this based on all the circumstantial evidence and just basic common sense. You have 15 Saudis who are linked to intel and military flying in, go to the Saudi consulate where this happens, and then they fly out. President Trump says, quote, "Here we go again with, you're guilty until proven innocent. I don't like that. We just went through that with Justice Kavanaugh, and he was innocent all the way. So I was unconcerned." What do you make of that?
I am concerned that not only President Trump doesn't seem interested in finding out what happened, Secretary Pompeo doesn't seem interested in finding out what happened. As you mentioned earlier, he said we're not interested in talking about the facts. So who is interested in finding out what happened? Because I saw what the Saudi Arabian government did in the wake of Jamal's disappearance, whatever you'd like to call it. They issued a warning to their people saying that spreading fake news or smears online is punishable up to 5 years in prison and about $800,000. That's what they're going to do there. So why? It is on us to find out. I don't want to rely on the Turks anymore. I want our people to find out.
So Caitlin, let's play that sound from Secretary of State Pompeo after he left Saudi Arabia regarding his meeting with the Crown Prince and talk about it.
Did they say that Mr. Khashoggi is alive or dead?
I don't want to talk about any of the facts. They didn't want to either, in that they want to have the opportunity to complete this investigation in a thorough way.
I mean this completely sincerely. What was the point of him going to Saudi Arabia if they didn't talk about any of the facts?
Well, that's the question, and that's who's coming back to brief President Trump. And White House officials are essentially waiting to see what Mike Pompeo is going to say when he gets back after visiting Riyadh and then going to Turkey to talk to officials. That is why President Trump sent him there, because initially when all this is happening, President Trump was expressing concern and saying there's going to be severe punishment if it is the Saudis who are responsible for this guy's death. But then we saw Pompeo go there, and he's smiling in pictures with MBS. We see photos of his spokesperson smiling, posing while she's in Turkey. Those are raising a lot of questions about what exactly it was that they're doing there. And then he can't even answer the simple question of whether or not this reporter is dead or alive. He is asked, is he dead or is he alive? And he said, well, we didn't talk about the facts. So that's raising a lot of questions. That's who's going to be briefing President Trump now.
But this is all the wrong way. We know what happened. We know what happened. He was lured to the Saudi
But what
embassy
message does it send to the Saudis?
He was lured to, yeah, I agree, but I mean, we know what happened. I mean, we don't know every grisly detail, and I'm not sure we want to know of the torture and his killing, but we know he was lured to the embassy there and killed, right? Yeah. There's no question about that. He's not there as a fact finder. He's supposed to be there conducting U.S. foreign policy, and they're trying to distract this into some, police detective show
really,
where, we have to find out all these details before making a judgment. What judgment is there to make? Shouldn't they be having meetings of the National Security Council to say what is our policy going forward to Saudi Arabia?
It looked like the folks from the State Department went on a dang on vacation in Saudi Arabia and Turkey this past week on America's tax dollars. I literally do not understand the purpose of the chief of the State Department rolling around smiling next to MBS and while in Turkey. This makes absolutely no sense. The point that Bill made earlier about the fact that there are no, in the region, in Saudi Arabia and Turkey, that we lack high-level State Department officials, we lack the ambassadors, we lack the senior but lower-level staff in those offices, is not something that should be glossed over. There is no, when Pompeo is not there, we have no one on the ground. We have no high-level staff on the ground to connect with the other governments.
Well, we have diplomatic staff.
We have some diplomatic staff. We don't have the high-level staff, right. Jake. We don't have the folks that can march in there and have the follow-up conversations. And so this is what's going on, and this is all we've got. I, frankly, am extremely concerned and unimpressed.
But the larger question is, what is the response going to be? Because you hear Pompeo there, and maybe he's waiting for the full investigation to be completed, because they've called on them to conduct this investigation. So if that's their defense, then that's fine. But the question that was posed to President Trump just this morning is, if the Saudis are responsible, what are you going to do? What will your response be? And he didn't say it's going to be bad, it's going to be ugly, like his allies on Capitol Hill, including Senator Lindsey Graham, are saying. Instead, he turned the answer into something about how important the Saudi-U.S. relationship is to him, talking about that arms deal. And that's exactly what Pompeo told reporters as well. He's like, while you're thinking about all of this, you've got to consider our financial and governmental relationship.
Yeah, I can tell you the answer now. The answer is they will do as little as they think they can get away with doing to be tough with the Saudis.
Everyone stick around. Robert Mueller reportedly almost ready to deliver his report. How soon could we see the report on the president's campaign in Russia, possible conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and more? Stay with us. Welcome back in politics. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is urging Special Counsel Robert Mueller to wrap up his investigation as quickly as possible, according to Bloomberg News. Mueller's report is expected to focus on possible conspiracy between members of the Trump team and Russia, and whether President Trump obstructed the investigation. CNN's Sarah Murray joins me now. And Sarah, the Mueller report, we're told, is likely to drop after the midterms, but beyond that, is there any more specific timing?
Well, Jake, Mueller has been in sort of this quiet period for a little while, but with the midterms just weeks away, that's expected to change. And, we will see a report potentially sometime between the midterms, but before the end of the year. And that raises the big question of what exactly is going to be in this report. Anticipation is building about whether more indictments are soon to drop and exactly what Special Counsel Robert Mueller will wrap into his final report. The report, expected after the November election and before the end of the year, will be delivered to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. But it's up to him to decide if it will ever be made public for the American people. One outstanding question, just how much President Trump will cooperate. His lawyers are readying answers to Mueller's written questions. But in a Tuesday interview, the president told the Associated Press the whole process is a tremendous waste of time. Adding, we are looking at certain questions having to do with the word collusion. Of course, there was no collusion. Trump offered up his strongest defense yet of his son, Donald Trump Jr., who participated in the June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer who has ties to the Kremlin and promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. The meeting became about a different subject, and they couldn't get out of the meeting fast enough, Trump told the AP, while insisting his son is innocent. There's nobody harder on my son than I am. If he did something wrong, I would have been livid.
Well, the phony witch hunt. Phony witch hunt.
Despite his anger over the investigation, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions' decision to recuse himself from it, Trump still won't say whether he wants Sessions out. I could fire him whenever I want to fire him, but I haven't said that I was going to, Trump told the AP. But if you ask me, am I thrilled? No, I am not thrilled. The other person the president isn't thrilled with, his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, saying Cohen's under oath comments that he arranged hush money schemes at Trump's discretion were totally false. While downplaying Cohen's role, Trump said, oh, absolutely he's lying. And Michael Cohen was a PR person who did small legal work, very small legal work. Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, defended his client, tweeting, Trump calling anyone a liar is a compliment.
Now, sources are also telling CNN today that prosecutors met with Michael Cohen as well as his attorney. They are investigating Donald Trump's business as well as his charitable foundation. So it gives you an indication of why President Trump is none too happy with his former lawyer, Jake.
Very interesting, Sarah Murray. Thanks so much. Let's talk about that. Cohen cooperating with prosecutors who are looking at President Trump's businesses and his charity. That's according to Sarah Murray's reporting. This is in addition, obviously, to multiple meetings with special counsel Robert Mueller. If I were President Trump, this would bother me too.
Look, they say keep your friends close, your enemies closer, and I think they need to add keep your fixers from flipping. I think Donald Trump should be extremely concerned about the information that Michael Cohen could give to the Southern District New York attorney. If anybody can bring Donald Trump down, I do believe it's Michael Cohen.
And this does fit with what we've been told by people close to President Trump for a long time, that the real concern is with Southern District of New York investigation and not with the Mueller probe.
Especially, and we've seen with that damning New York Times report on his finances that didn't get the attention it deserved. And President Trump's response to it, he was so livid over that. And so we're just seeing that play out, of course. But also yesterday, we're seeing just how frustrated he is, again, with Michael Cohen. This has been playing out since April when they first broke into, according to the president, Michael Cohen's office and hotel, the FBI, with a search warrant.
Legally obtained search warrant, yeah.
With a search warrant. But we saw that just reflected even yesterday in that interview the president did, where he said that Michael Cohen is this PR person who did a very small amount of legal work. Well, what he did do for him was really consequential legal work, since he's the one who had to plead guilty, even though President Trump said he was lying when he pled guilty under oath, implicating him in that crime of paying that of violating that campaign finance law. So we're seeing just how frustrated the president is with Michael Cohen and how it's really coming back to affect him.
And man, I know you get a kick out of the fact that Democratic source told CNN's MJ Lee that Michael Cohen is prepared to campaign against President Trump for the Democrats.
Yeah.
You're, you know, as a former campaign hand, what do you make of that? Would you use Michael Cohen on the campaign?
No, he should be disqualified from political life. Listen, he defended Trump, he lied for Trump, he engaged in unethical business practice for Trump, and he only saw the light because federal prosecutors were knocking on his door. Of course, he should not go on the campaign trail, but the real problem for Trump is that he has engaged in unseemly behavior. We know that. He never set up any firewalls between his business, his campaign, and his family. That's where Michael Cohen comes into play. That's where Paul Manafort comes into play. That's where people in the Trump organization come into play. And so Mueller may release the findings from his report on collusion and obstruction of justice, but those court cases can unfurl much farther than that.
I think collusion is going to be very big. I mean, look,
you think they're going to find conspiracy, some evidence of it?
Yeah, and obstruction probably. I don't know if it's enough to impeach or to convict, but look, I mean, it's very interesting. Trump got all alarmed this week. He revived the witch hunt stuff and all this, and that was after a story period that Cohen had been spending 50 hours with both Mueller and, I think, Southern District of New York justice people. He accuses, Trump accuses Cohen of lying, right?
Right.
Sort of like this,
well,
like
he
some
did
movie.
lie for Trump a lot.
Well, wait a second, but the lie that he's accusing him of is saying that Trump was knowledgeable about the crime to which he pled guilty. I believe it's the case that when the Justice Department has to believe that when they accept a plea that it's truthful.
Right.
It's not like this is not some movie he flipped and now he starts lying about it.
Yeah.
So they have evidence that makes them believe that Cohen was being truthful when he said that Trump knew about this. So
well,
Trump,
audio evidence. We've heard some of the recordings.
Well, fair enough. So Trump can say, well, Cohen's lying, but Trump knows that the Justice Department has this evidence, and I think he's now very worried about what's about to happen after the election.
There are less than 3 weeks before the election. We're going to talk about midterms in the next block, but I do wonder, since we're talking about impeachable crimes, because you think that the Mueller is going to find something, some evidence of conspiracy.
I don't know. Let me be very
I don't
clear.
think we haven't heard a lot. I mean, Republicans want the Democrats to be talking about impeachment, but I haven't heard a lot.
Republicans don't want us to win the House. That's why, Jake. They don't want They don't want the Democrats to win.
But why would impeachment be a turnoff for voters?
Because, look, I think you have to give folks a vision. And I think what Democrats have seen is that we have to run on something. We cannot just run against someone. And frankly, running on impeachment is running against Donald Trump. And so what you've seen folks in the House do, and I know we'll talk about this, and also in Senate races, talk about health care. Talk about taxes. Talk about the economy. Talk about the fact that when Republicans gave a tax break to billionaires and millionaires, permanent tax breaks for them, semi-permanent, very temporary tax cuts for the rest of us. And now, look, the deficit is ballooning, and they're going to try to pay for that by snatching Medicare and Medicaid.
And the Democratic leaders are they poo-poo any talk of impeachment, Nancy Pelosi and the like. Who knows what will happen, whether or not they'll take the House, whether or not there will be articles of impeachment. But what's interesting is one of the arguments you hear about the replacing of John Kelly, the chief of staff, whose political obituary has been written now 15 times just in the last week, is he's not a political mind in terms of how is he going to deal with the Democratic House. How is he going to deal with impeachment? The president needs, to quote the Godfather, a wartime consigliere. Do you hear talk like that?
That's what people are saying, but it depends on if you like John Kelly or not, who's saying that. If it's the president's allies, whether they're inside or outside the White House, it's people who don't like John Kelly, who John Kelly has probably restricted their access to the president. They're saying John Kelly doesn't have a plan for when the Democrats do take back the House, which is largely considered in Washington what's going to happen in 3 weeks from now. But President Trump seems to be in this fantasy that that's not going to happen, that somehow things have reversed with the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation fight, and that now Republicans are going to be okay. Republicans probably wish he would stop saying that because they want voters to be worried that Democrats are going to take back the House, so they'll come out and turn out. But the question inside the White House is, what are they going to do to respond to that? And it really depends on who you ask. But then also the greater question is, how do you prepare for something like that? How do you prepare for aides to be called up to come testify on Capitol Hill and the president to be attacked on a daily basis? It's really it could derail his agenda, what agenda he's accomplished so far, if they do take it back. And you are seeing an increasing concern about that from President Trump. But he's also becoming less concerned with the midterms and more concerned with 2020. We've heard the president in private conversations has been talking more about who's going to run against him than what's going to happen this fall.
All right, everyone stick around. We got a lot more to talk about. What a difference a couple of years can make in politics.
In the case of Lion Ted Cruz, Lion Ted lies. Oh, he lies.
Wait until you hear about the change in tune about Ted Cruz today from President Trump. That's next. We're back with our politics lead and a ringing endorsement from President Trump today in one of the most consequential midterm elections in the country. The president tweeting in part, quote, "Ted Cruz has done so much for Texas. Ted has long had my strong endorsement." For his part, campaigning in Texas, Cruz was very grateful for the love note.
I'm appreciated the president's tweet this morning. I'm very glad that the president is coming on Monday to come down to Texas for a rally in Houston.
That is so sweet, because it wasn't that long ago that those two were trading devastating insults, starting with Trump coming up with a nasty nickname for his then primary opponent.
Lion Ted Cruz. He's Lion Ted. He's no good, I'm telling you. Lyin', Lion Ted.
Then it got even more bizarre. Trump suggesting Cruz's father was somehow linked to the assassination of JFK.
I mean, what was he doing with Lee Harvey Oswald shortly before the death, before the shooting? It's horrible.
And going after Cruz's wife, Heidi, threatening in a tweet to, quote, "spill the beans on her," and then retweeting this unflattering photo comparing her to Melania.
It is not acceptable for a big, loud New York bully to attack my wife. I don't get angry often. But you mess with my wife, you mess with my kids, that'll do it every time. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
Which led to this at the Republican National Convention.
God bless each and every one of you, and God bless the United States of America.
I like that movement. And what you heard there at the end was Senator Cruz getting booed at the Republican National Convention because he did not explicitly endorse Donald Trump for president during his speech. But we're in a different period now. That was then. This is now. And Amanda, you used to work for Ted Cruz. Are you surprised by this you know, kindling of romance that we're seeing between these two.
Yeah, but I guess it's better for Cruz that Trump is saying nice things about him rather than negative things. The thing that I actually think is most bizarre, in the debate that Ted Cruz had with his opponent last night, Beto O'Rourke, Beto picked up Trump's attacks on Cruz, went off with the lion Ted. And I just think that's so funny because Democrats supposedly think, like, Trump is this terrible moral character. So why are they using his talking points?
Well, to be clear, Beto O'Rourke was not lobbing personal insults.
No, he said Donald Trump
We have the tape. We have the tape. Let's roll the tape. I just want to show the debate last night, Congressman Beto O'Rourke and Senator Ted Cruz. And here is the page out of the Trump nasty nickname book that Beto O'Rourke took.
Senator Cruz is not going to be honest with you. He's going to make up positions and votes that I've never held or have ever taken. He's dishonest. It's why the president called him Lying Ted, and it's why the nickname stuck, because it's true.
Exactly. So I'd like to know.
So wait, you agree with Trump now?
What I am saying is what Beto O'Rourke was laying out is that Ted Cruz has a history of not telling the truth to voters. He has a history of misrepresenting his position.
This is why Beto's going to lose.
And that's what he said. Beto never said, that's why you're lying, Ted. He presented the argument and then inserted a very poignant attack line that I know folks don't like from President Trump. Look, the fact of the matter here is, though, if I was Ted Cruz, I don't care how down I was in the polls. My moral dignity, and my self-respect would not allow me to take support from someone that talked about my father, talked about my wife, lambasted my character, and attacked me personally.
Well, I just want to say, if Beto's the next great Southern hope to save the Democratic Party and run for president in 2020, he's going to have to do better than recycle Donald Trump's attacks.
So this happens in politics, right? I mean, it does, you know, Ted Kennedy says nasty things about Jimmy Carter and then endorses him. John McCain and George W. Bush hated each other. I don't think that's too strong a word. They hated each other, but ultimately came to a political agreement and alliance. The difference here is that the stuff that Trump himself has said, Bush had surrogates say things nasty about McCain and his family, the stuff Trump himself has said personally about his dad, about his wife, spilling the beans, it's just remarkable to see. And I get Trump needs Texas to stay red and Cruz needs to win. I get that. But it is surprising.
I mean, it would be surprising if you had, except for the last 2 years, have made nothing surprising anymore. Yeah, the degree to which, I mean, Trump's behavior has been normalized, certainly mostly by Republicans. But I would say, honestly, I think that's a mistake of what Beto did yesterday, citing the president. Even the president says you're a lying Ted. But wait, does Beto O'Rourke think that Trump is a reliable source? I think that doesn't work in politics very well, in my opinion. It's clever. It's like the kind of thing a consultant tells you, this is clever. You can cite Trump against Ted, and then some of the Trump supporters will think that will go anti-Ted. But it's a mistake. He had a good message. It was an upbeat message. It was a bipartisan message. It was Cruz is too right-wing. Cruz wants to cut your Medicare and Social Security. Cruz wants to raise taxes to help get tax base to the rich. A perfectly sensible message. Maybe it would even work in Texas, even though it's a tough state. And I do think it sort of confuses things for a Democrat to now be citing Trump.
Well, on a lighter note, Trump did say when he went to Texas, where he's going on Monday to campaign for him, that he was going to fill the biggest stadium he could find.
Yeah.
If you're any kind of football fan,
he said something that wasn't
you
true.
are any kind of football fan, you know that the stadium they picked on Monday is certainly not the biggest one. They're not going to Jerry World or anything like that.
Where they're going, it's like an 8,000 seat.
Much smaller in Houston, much smaller. So it's just interesting. The president tweeted he's going to find the biggest stadium in Texas. You know that they've got big stadiums in Texas, and it's a little bit smaller than the 100,000 people that Jerry World holds.
If I can just say, the fact that Beto O'Rourke is even within striking distance for Ted Cruz is something noteworthy. So maybe, look, I hope Beto pulls it out in November, but I'll be pleasantly surprised if he does.
He's going to get a lot of money to lose by 5.
He's opened up the door to allow someone else to come in after that.
Speaking of Trump rallies, the president has 3 more rallies scheduled just this week. The Associated Press, in their interview, asked him, since you're out campaigning so much, will you take some of the blame if Republicans lose the House next month? His answer, quote, no, I think I'm helping people. I don't believe anybody's ever had this kind of impact. But compare that to how the president was trying to motivate voters just a few weeks ago.
I'm not on the ticket, but I am on the ticket because this is also a referendum about me. Get out and vote. I want you to vote. Pretend I'm on the ballot.
So is he on the ballot or is he not on the ballot?
To be fair to Trump, on the one hand, you know, the in-party, when they control both houses of Congress, the presidency,
you lose
tend to lose 30
seats.
So having said that, what districts he's losing? The gender gap is 30 points. He's losing districts where well-respected Republican congressmen and congresswomen are going to lose because the district has become so anti-Trump.
Your district?
Yeah, my district in Northern Virginia, I think, likely. So there, I do think Trump actually is doing more damage to the Republicans than a typical incumbent president, especially with the economy being good and until Mr. Khashoggi, no obvious foreign policy crisis. No, so it is partly a referendum on Trump.
And it's pretty simple. If they win, Trump's going to say it's because he was on the ballot. If they lose, he's going to say it had nothing to do with him and he did what he could.
Well, if they pick up one Senate seat, this is why he's going to all these.
Well, that might
states.
happen,
and that could happen. I'm not sure, but
Dakota, Missouri, New Jersey,
he will do a very. And look, he can be pretty good at this. He and his surrogates will go out there and say, better than the usual midterm. You know, often you lose both houses, 94, whatever.
Mark Short was on CNN yesterday saying that the average when there's one-party control, it's a loss of 48 seats. So anything less than that is a victory. The spin began. I thought it was pretty well done. You talked about women. Amanda, President Trump just tweeted, college-educated women want safety, security, and health care protections very much along with financial and economic health for themselves and our country. I supply all of this far better than any Democrat for decades, actually. That's why they will be voting for me. So don't worry. Women will vote for Trump, according to Trump.
I mean, that's all true, but he could also stop tweeting about the porn actress that he had an affair with. Like, that would be a good thing to...
Stop calling them horse face?
Yes, like, all that kind of stuff. But listen, I was worried about the blue wave, but now that I look at the map, things have stabilized. I was worried about Republicans losing Senate seats in Arizona, Tennessee. Those have stabilized. And now, like, I think it's very likely Republicans will make gains.
In the Senate?
Yes. You look at the Republican candidates in North Dakota, Missouri, New Jersey is in play right now, and possibly Florida. I mean, it may not be that bad for Republicans.
I think it could be bad. I think the wave picks up in the last 2 weeks. My personal view. We'll see.
The wave kicks up, and we do not know who a likely voter is in this midterm election.
That's true.
A lot of unlikely voters will come out in midterm elections, and I think that will deliver.
We'll see. And a reminder, CNN's Dan Bash will moderate the Texas Senate Town Hall with Beto O'Rourke. That's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern on CNN. Just minutes ago, one of the nation's highest honors was awarded to a war hero, 50 years in the making. Stay with us.
14 Parts Unknown, the final episodes. New episodes Sundays at 9 on CNN.
He's been called totally fearless and a true leader by the men who fought by his side in Vietnam. Just moments ago, retired U.S. Marine Corps Sergeant Major John Canley became the 300th Marine to receive the Medal of Honor. Sergeant Major Canley is cited for saving many of his company members during one of the bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War in early 1968. CNN's Barbara Starr has the story.
Marine Corps Sergeant Major John Canley, a Vietnam hero, honored at the White House with the nation's highest award for valor in combat.
He assaulted enemy strongholds, killed enemy fighters, and with deadly accuracy did everything you had to do.
Now 80 years old, Canley was lauded by the President of the United States for a battle in which 147 Marines were killed and 857 wounded.
Despite sustaining serious injuries, very, very serious injuries, he continued to face down the enemy with no thought for his own safety. John waged 7 straight days of unrelenting combat, personally saving the lives of more than 20 Marines.
Years later, Canley still speaking about what it takes to be a leader.
I think it's about taking care of subordinates. As a leader, as long as subordinate unit leaders take care of their people, you don't really have to worry about the mission.
And in Vietnam, he was a heroic leader at the Battle of Hue City in 1968. Canley spoke for this Defense Department video.
My Marines, because they believed in me, they would follow me to death. And I had no doubt about that.
Hue City saw a month of brutal house-to-house combat before U.S. and South Vietnamese forces took control. Canley fought off ongoing enemy attacks, and despite suffering his own injuries, he carried other wounded Marines to safety and led his team into the city.
He stood up in the middle of firefights. I don't know what else to say, but that's, and I know that might sound unrealistic to people listening, but you'll hear that from every Alpha Company Marine.
He climbed the wall of a hospital in full view of enemy forces to carry out more wounded Marines twice on just one day in a faraway place half a century ago.
Sergeant Major Canley is the 58th United States Marine to receive this honor for service in Vietnam. He is the first to receive it while still living. Jake?
Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you so much. And we at the Lead would like to thank Sergeant Major John Canley for his service and for his sacrifice. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Jake Tapper. You can tweet the show at The Lead CNN. Our coverage on CNN continues right now.